we finish Muckle, Gonzalez, and Camp, the chapter 8 that we've been slowly reading our way through about the idea of culture, what it is, talked about how you should and shouldn't think about culture. And in today's class, we talk about, or we read about the idea of doing field work. I'd like to put that into the context of our overall scope of the course, really, how we're doing things, is that when anthropologists started off as an academic discipline, there were a lot of ideas that the people that were being studied out there were somehow inferior or lacking in terms of their achievements. And so anthropology begins with this notion that other people are actually experts at things, and we might be able to learn something from their learned cultural patterns. And so that's what the idea of culture is in general. And in the next class, we're going to be talking about language, our next couple classes. So we'll be talking about the related concept of language. And then the week after that, we'll be talking about economics and subsistence, how people get food. We'll then have an exam, which will cover basically the idea of culture, what it is, what we've been reading about, language, economics, and subsistence. Then in the next part of the class, we'll go into kinship, marriage, family, gender, all these different patterns that people have had through time and all over the world that are really quite fascinating and interesting and might tell us something about our own society and the way our own ideas about these issues. We'll go into issues of politics and how societies are organized, and tackle the question of how people govern themselves. Again, something that many people assumed was impossible for those who were outside of the European or North American norms. I'll talk about supernaturalism, religion and rituals, and at the end of the course talk about sustainability, which is one of the things that people outside of the industrialized North have learned a lot about over time. And in some ways, it is through this long overtime approach, bring in some archaeology too, that we learn how societies have been able to maintain and live in their environments. And so the idea of anthropology is that people learn these patterns. These are not things that are determined by their biology or determined by their environment, and that we can learn them too, or we can learn about them, or we can replicate the conditions in our own bodies by going there and doing what we call ethnographic field work. So now I put a little line between what we're studying up until the exam and then after the exam. Any questions? All right, so ethnographic fieldwork is, like I said, we discussed this at the end of the Muckle, Gonzalez, and Camp chapter. The primary method of anthropology is known as participant observation, which is kind of a fancy way of saying that you try to participate as much as possible, but you are never fully a part, you don't kid yourself and think that you're part of that society. You're also doing observation, but you're trying to do it as closely as possible. And it's important that people know that you're doing this research. You're not supposed to be just an outside observer, or just kind of like, you're not supposed to be doing something like spying. People are supposed to have supposed to know about that. And there's a section on, bless you, a section on ethics there, and how it's important for anthropologists to basically say what they're doing and get people to have informed consent that they're part of that study. Ideally, field work, having this experience of field work is going to reinforce some of the primary components, some of the main points that we learned about the idea of culture. Because by going there and talking to people and immersing yourself in a society that you are, in some cases, completely unfamiliar with, or maybe it is your own society but looked at with an anthropological lens, what you're hoping to do is to figure out, those patterns of human life within their own terms. And so the reasons why people do what they do from their own point of view, and that's the point of cultural relativism. Of course, not necessarily that we're going to approve of what other people are doing. You might be studying something that is in some fundamental way bad or abhorrent, but you would want to understand it from within somebody's point of view, perhaps because you're trying to figure out why or how to change such a thing. You're hopefully going to learn that these patterns then are learned, and by trying to learn them yourself, you will learn how they are transmitted. Sometimes people think that anthropological fieldwork is like becoming a child, or trying to become a child again in another place. You'll also hopefully learn by talking to different people how people have different opinions and the variability of those ideas. If you've done your field work well, it becomes difficult to believe that people's ideas are racially determined, because you're going to find that people of the same so-called race have a huge variety of different things of thinking about the world. And so, as we've talked about, anthropologists were not necessarily good people to start out with. They aren't even now, but in the structure of this situation, hopefully helps people understand that the hierarchies, the ethnocentric hierarchies that were created, didn't match up to people's actual abilities and their capacity for achievement. And so by doing this, what we're trying to do is to document how people behave, think, what they have and do across human groups. So that's one of the things that anthropologists are most famous for, doing this outside of their own societies, but also within a group, how people are going to be varied. There is always going to be heterogeneity and variation within any human group. So it's not a complicated idea, just like culture is not a complicated idea, but it was in opposition to some of the ideas at the time of people's inferiority or lack of accomplishment in these areas. And as I hope we'll see, it led to some pretty amazing discoveries about people. I wanted to show you an 8-minute documentary of 3 anthropologists' fieldwork projects from MIT. It's called Doing Anthropology. And one of the things I like about it, it shows what anthropologists are doing in the contemporary world, but it also is something that is mentioned in in Muckle, Gonzalez, and Camp on page 208, Heather Paxson's ethnography on the life of cheese comes up, and you get to see her in the video.